Hello class, today we are continuing with our investigation into epistemology, and one way that we're considering epistemology is also by way of truth, and then also looking at the problems of how it is that we understand truth by way of conspiracy theories. So today we're going to look at conspiracy theories and how we're understanding conspiracy theories as true or false. Looking at a few philosophers. One is Cass Sunstein. And then we're also looking at a book review by Simon Blackburn of the book titled Conspiracy Theories by Kassem Kassem. And before we get going on what the philosophers point out, I know that right as we were going into lockdown for the pandemic, I was also considering how it is that we understand conspiracy theories, and I wrote some points down because I think there was a lot of talk about QAnon, so on and so forth, and I became curious of conspiracy theories and then decided to actually have more investigation into how it is that we're understanding them so that we could possibly run a class on conspiracy theories. So I wrote down some points just to begin with in terms of how it is that we're identifying what conspiracy theories are, and likewise some problems in terms of the truth. So first point, we can't as a rule personally and empirically affirm everything we know. So in other words, there's no such thing as having 100% verification of every truth claim we have about things. So that's really an impossibility, and it's also an area where the conspiracy theorist relies on to justify or to elaborate more on his or her conspiracy theory. Then there's this idea that power and the desire for power affirms the truth of conspiracies as well. So in other words, powerful people could be making conspiratorial claims, so on and so forth. And that also is a way in which we're understanding conspiracy theories. And then likewise, also conspiracy theories often have to do with this notion of calling into question the trustworthiness of people in power, whether we know who those people in power are or not. So that's also an aspect there. And then another thing that we have to at least clarify is that there are conspiracies that are actually true. So like, for example, a student was just telling me today about the so-called light bulb conspiracy, that in other words, in the 19th century, light bulb companies were actually manufacturing light bulbs that would go out sooner than they needed to, so as to have people continue buying light bulbs more than they needed to in order to, in the name of profits. And this sometimes is known as quote-unquote planned obsolescence. So there are conspiracy theories that are true. Another one would be the idea that oil companies, and this just was discovered not so long ago, about a year or so ago, where oil companies were shown to suppress the problems of global warming in order to call into question the veracity of climate change, in order to continue selling fossil fuels, making a profit from fossil fuels, so on and so forth. Then also contrary to popular belief, we are never simply working, thinking, and acting with facts alone in the world. So in other words, when we are thinking that we're only relying on facts, we have to realize that actually it's not the case that we're always dealing with facts. So that's also an illusion of, an epistemological illusion in terms of truth as well, because we are dealing with facts, but we're not always dealing with facts. And there's always a way in which we're considering relations, and then we're also considering things that are not facts, mistakes of understanding, dishonesty, so on and so forth, just not getting the truth straight, on and on. And then also too, if you just think about your own pattern of thinking, you're never just thinking of fact, right? It's never just, we're never just dealing in facts. We're also dealing with questions. We're dealing with things that we don't know. We're dealing with not having all the information, so on and so forth. Then also, we also have another important feature of knowledge acquisition in terms of conspiracies, and that is just outright skepticism. So skepticism is a double-edged sword, because it's a way in which we start philosophical knowledge by becoming skeptical as to how it is that we're understanding the truth, say, or even the truth of conspiracy theories. But at the same time, conspiracy theories rely on this skepticism to further continue with further claims, etc. So it's useful, but at the same time, there's like a destructive, negative aspect to the way in which we're understanding skepticism as well. Then lastly, freedom isn't always a good thing, right? That is, expressions of evil and immorality are also linked to a desire to be free to inflict harm, spread disinformation. People openly feel that they could be free to hate others and to distrust others. And so we always have to remember that immorality and evil are expressions of freedom. Freedom and evil go hand in hand. In other words, immorality is an expression of free will. And we need to recognize that, because we often don't. But then the question is, what is a conspiracy, right? So if we look it up, we come up with a basic definition where we're considering that it's a theory that serves as an explanation for an event or set of circumstances as a result of or a direct plot, usually by powerful conspirators. So that's like the usual framework in which we look at conspiracy theories. And so let's start with looking at Cass Sunstein. So Cass Sunstein was born in 1954. He's an American legal scholar who's alive today. And I believe he also served in the Obama cabinet as well. And he talks a lot about conspiracy theories, and he sees conspiracy theories as a way in which we're searching for an outlet. In other words, when we're looking at what brings conspiracy theories about, he sees conspiracy theory as a way that people are looking for an outlet. So in other words, if people have experienced a traumatic event, for example, and also they're looking for an outlet to vent their rage, right? But we also know too that all conspiracy theories are not necessarily born from traumatic events, although they often are, right? That's why we had a lot of conspiracy theories with the COVID pandemic, so on and so forth. But there are conspiracy theories that are not necessarily having to do with tragic events. But he does have a point. Secondly, another way in which conspiracy theories come about has to do with social networks or social media, right? Where we are look at social networks of like-minded people, enhance the radical and extreme nature of the ideas put forth. In other words, social media can be what we call an echo chamber of questionable beliefs as well. And so correction to the dubious claim only serves to enhance the viability of the conspiracy and or as an amplification of it. And that also points to something that we were looking at in terms of how it is that we're understanding the truth as well. In other words, if you can't falsify something as true, then that gives you a good idea that the claim of truth is problematic in the first place. In other words, if it cannot be falsified by reason, for the conspiracy theorist, they double down and protect their theories and our ideas as true. So in other words, this is another way of seeing conspiracy theories as immune from refutation, insulated by evidence. And so that's a red flag right there that there's a problem in terms of the truth. Because any truth claim should undergo problems of falsifications to see where mistakes are being made. And if they cannot, then that's the first indicator that we're looking at a pseudo truth. So then 3, if you believe in a false conspiracy theory to begin with, it's likely that you'll believe in others as well, right? Okay, so that's Cass Sunstein's analysis of how it is that conspiracy theories are brought about. What's the framework that is in place where conspiracy theories thrive? Then we're turning to the British philosopher Kassam, who was born in 1961, and we're looking at a book review by Simon Blackburn. So Simon Blackburn's a famous philosopher in his own right. He is thought of as a quasi-realist in terms of ethics. And so when we're looking at what Kassam lays out as far as what to look for in terms of a conspiracy theory and how it is that we're understanding them, number 1, he sees conspiracy theories as speculative. In other words, conspiracy theories are free floating evidence, so they're not, you don't have to have all the evidence. And likewise, that's also a way in which we're understanding problems with the truth as well. Conspiracy theories could be contrarian. In other words, they could be contrary to obvious explanations of how something comes about, so on and so forth. Conspiracy theories for Kassam also could be thought of as esoteric, and because they contain large-scale mysteries and the like. And again, this idea of mystery is a way in which we're understanding truth. So therefore, we could see that the conspiracy theorist does rely on some of these essential components of how it is that we're understanding things as true, and likewise things as false. Oftentimes, according to Kassam, the conspiracy theory could be thought of as amateurish. In other words, it's not claimed by a specialist in the field. Think of Alex Jones, for example. There could also be claims of elements that are quote-unquote pre-modern. In other words, echoing some sort of mythical origin in that regard. And then they could also be what we just looked at earlier as self-sealing. In other words, everything happens for a reason, and there's no way that we could falsify the claim by way of reason. In other words, to prove its falsity is to affirm its veracity, at least in terms of how the conspiracy theorist works. Then Kassim succinct in his appraisal of conspiracy theories as basically a form of political propaganda that is a response to the needs of the conspiracy theorist to point out some political problem. So we could think of problems of QAnon and the like. And also when we're thinking of propaganda, we're seeing propaganda as a means of publicizing a biased point of view, often for political aims, and also with an emotional component or some feeding into some stereotype, misinformation, that sort of thing. Then for Kassim, there's a strong appeal to emotions as a means of persuasion. So in other words, we could feed on people's anger, people's fear, their disenfranchisement, their discontent. A big one is that someone somewhere is getting wronged, or we are getting unjust treatment or something like that, and so therefore we need to have this conspiracy theory as an explanation. And so what we're thinking of there too is that sometimes the truth is not always what we want to hear, and so that's also part of how it is that we're understanding conspiracy theories coming about, because we might not like or understand the truth or have all the facts clear, and so therefore we fill in the gaps with conspiracy theories. So still, Blackburn considers the notion that Kassim is suggesting that the way to challenge a conspiracy theorist is to call them out or embarrass them. Yet the open question is something that Blackburn asks: will the Proud Boys be shamed or embarrassed with the claim that, calling them out on the claim that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile ring out of a pizza parlor in New Jersey, right? Chances are they're not going to be all that embarrassed, or at least hurt by some embarrassing claim, truth claim, to call into question Hillary Clinton running a pedophile ring out of a pizza parlor, right? So is that really a way in which we could challenge the conspiracy theorist? Probably not. So one problem, as Blackburn points out, is to suggest that conspiracy theories are really a way for people to seem more intelligent than they really are, that sort of thing, more of an authority than they actually are. And likewise, and we could also see there elements of confidence in the way that you talk about or put forth your ideas. So that could also be a factor there too. And likewise, there are conspiracy theories. Are all conspiracy theories thought of as politically motivated, right? Probably not. So in other words, the conspiracy theory that Bill Gates was injecting microchips in the COVID vaccine, is that really thought of as political motivation? That's not clear, right? And then so Blackburn suggests that instead of embarrassing the conspiracy theorist, this isn't as good as Aristotle's notion of practicing virtue habitually, i.e., we're prone to be more trustworthy if we are so in our day-to-day life. So that is a rather intriguing point, because what he's proposing there is that we go on the offensive. In other words, we look at our own trustworthy qualities, and then likewise how it is that we're trusting claims that other people make. And I think when we get clearer on how that's working, we could see the problems of the conspiracy theorist. In other words, if someone's claiming that all these other people are untrustworthy, we also could see that there are problems in terms of the conspiracy theorist as making a claim to their own trustworthy nature as well. So in other words, if you're saying all these other people are untrustworthy, question is, what's that saying about your own trust? How well can we trust you, right? Blackburn also recommends that the way in which we could combat conspiracy theorists is to look to the philosopher David Hume as well, the empiricist David Hume, who had a way to dispel miracles. A threefold way in which to dispel miracles, i.e., if you ever hear a story or claim about a miracle, and in this case, a claim about a conspiracy theorist, and wonder if it's true, we need to think of three things. One, that events in the story if we are to consider the events in the story, do they conform to a basic understanding of how things are in the world? And then two, is the story itself what you would expect to hear if the events had happened as described? So in other words, if we're understanding number one, we're suggesting that is there a way that we could think of the conspiracy theory as conforming to a basic understanding of how things are in the world? So like, for instance, with the Bill Gates microchips in vaccines, it's very hard to imagine that you could have a microchip that you could inject in people by way of a vaccine, right? And then again, what's the point of that? So in other words, is this according to something that's realistic, right? And then three, what other explanations could be the case in terms of how the story is realistically understood? In other words, how probable are other explanations? And right there we could see that oftentimes the conspiracy theorist is working on a sort of fantastical account of how things are, and so the way that things actually are might not be as exciting or dramatic or have the same appeal. And so that could be a reason why people put forth conspiracy theories. So you want to think of a few rules of thumb to consider. So one thing that we're looking at is this issue of people being untrustworthy, because we have to at least admit that, well, sometimes people are untrustworthy. Then we could also look to ways in which we were understanding the truth in terms of just making mistakes in terms of how it is that we're understanding things. Another point that we could think of as well is that people are dishonest in terms of how it is that they're understanding the truth, and likewise how they're understanding falsity or misunderstanding it, as the case may be. Another point is that people like to fool other people. In other words, how gullible are you? Let me tell you a story. And if you believe it, then I got my story to have more traction, so on and so forth. So people are victims of self-deception. People can be deceived either by themselves or by other people. And then also people are prone to believe whatever they want to believe on a whim. So in other words, we pick and choose what we want to believe, and depending on who's telling us what we think of or confirm as true, this could also lend itself to issues of conspiracy theory propagation. And so as Blackburn concludes and goes back to credit Cassim, the appeal to the emotion of the conspiracy theorist doesn't seem like such a bad idea. In other words, maybe we do need to embarrass them. Maybe we do need to call them out, to anger them, to get them to think otherwise, so on and so forth. So this appeal to emotion does have some value, and it doesn't seem like such a bad idea for Blackburn. After all, emotions are what gets us moving in terms of ethics, and likewise what gets the conspiracy theorist to put forth their ideas and for people to believe what they're putting forth. And also, we need to understand the perils of aimless skepticism as well. So in other words, just being skeptical for the sake of skepticism is really also at the heart of the problem. And so we need to consider how it is that we are regulating our skepticism, which is a helpful tip by Blackburn. Okay, so I think we'll just end it there, talk more about it in class, and talk to you later.